Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Way podcast, where we learn in English poco a poco or podcast by podcast. Today is an episode specifically for the upper levels of English, your B2, C1, C2, specifically in the writings. A lot of students improve other aspects of the exam, the reading, the listening, the speaking. They improve those aspects relatively quickly. But the writing is a part that it takes a long time to learn how to integrate your levels into the writing and how to demonstrate your level. And a lot of students think that the way that you write is the way that you speak, and that is completely incorrect. So today's episode is also a video on YouTube, so you can either listen to the podcast normally, or if you want to see what I'm seeing on the screen, you can watch it via YouTube. Also, today's episode will have a downloadable worksheet, what I'm looking at now, so that if in the future you do want to have a look, you'll be able to access it. Okay, so how to pass the writing exam. So I'm going to read parts of what I've written just to clarify it for myself, and then I will go into more depth of anything that I think needs clarifying. Okay, so why have I created this? Purely from what I can see, what my students are doing, right? Students really struggle with writings because, well, ChatGPT exists in 2026, and a lot of people are not used to or accustomed to writing for themselves anymore. Not only in Spanish, not only in English, but also in Spanish. So it's a very normal thing that, we have tools that we can use that make life easier for ourselves. Another thing is that there's a level of critical thinking that is necessary in writing, especially for more formal writings. And a lot of students don't have enough practice of how to utilize that, how to access that quickly. A lot of students fail the exam because they also, let's say that you are a C1 student and you're a very good C1 student. Some students think that they don't need to not practice and study, but they think, oh, well, I'm so good at speaking, I'm definitely going to pass the exam, not knowing that there are actually structures in place and there's a system in place that you need to work in order to get high marks in the exam, right? And finally, I would also add that a lot of students do practice and study, and if they're going to an academy, they know what types of writings that they need to do. But when you're at home, you can chill, you can listen to music, you can Google Translate. They are not accustomed to functioning under pressure. Execution of a writing under pressure is a completely different ball game. That's an expression, a completely different ball game. It's like tennis and basketball. They are not the same, right? So let's go. That's why I decided to create this, because we are in exam season. So I'm making this in April. A lot of students are preparing for June, right? The things that I'm going to be focusing on, I've written it down here, and we're going to break it down bit by bit. The rubric, so what the examiners are focusing on, the structures, something that you need to realize about different types of writings, register and tone, linking words and cohesive devices, which is basically your vocabulary and how you approach the writing, and then finally, how to add in the correct grammar. Okay, so starting with the writing rubric. Now, different exams function differently. The examiners are looking for different things. There's no universal writing structure. For example, language cert is slightly different to Cambridge, which is slightly different to IELTS. But in general, there are four things that we're looking for, right? Which is content and task fulfillment. Have you answered the questions fully? If there were 3 questions, did you answer all 3, or did you only answer 1? Communicative achievement, meaning how did your writing translate from writer to reader? Organization and language. So let's break it down. Content and task fulfillment is exactly what I said. Have you answered all the content questions? How clear is it that you answered the questions? Now, this is a problem, especially from a B2 perspective. If I think of like a Cambridge essay for writings for B2, guys, if you're in B2 doing the Cambridge essay, you need to clarify which 2 points. Well, you have 3 points. You have 2 points that are given to you, and you have to invent your own point. A lot of the time, when the examiner or the reader is reading your essay, you just assume that what you write is obviously it must be there, the content must be there. But if the examiner has to search and look for this specific point that explains that this answers the question, you're not doing a good job in your writing. The same as C1, right? In C1 Cambridge, for example, you have 3 choices to choose from, and you need to choose 2, and in the end, compare which one is better, right? So the B1 and B2 and B1, the B2 and C1 essays function slightly differently. But if students are not analyzing and actually looking what is necessary, they don't make a strong enough introduction. They don't make a strong enough conclusion, and it's all very wishy-washy, right? So make sure that it is clear for the reader, not for yourself. You are the not important. What is the important is how it comes across in your writing. So that's the content. Looking at communicative achievement and means how well have you communicated your idea. So I have some questions. Number 1, does it translate from Spanish to English? And is it difficult to read or understand? So what happens often in a writing is that students sort of write not realizing that like their grammar structures don't really make sense, because sometimes students are thinking in Spanish but writing in English. So there's a Spanish English direct translation that doesn't work. Another thing that students do is that they don't really reread what they've written. So maybe it makes sense while you are writing, but then they're like, earlier, here's my writing, toma. Which, that doesn't function either. If you can't read and analyze what you've written, you're not going to get full marks. Okay. Next question is there space for doubt, right? What that means is while I'm reading your writing and I have questions like how did that happen? Or why would someone do this? Or why would someone choose this option? If there is space for me to ask these types of questions, it means you haven't fully communicated the idea properly. Does that make sense? Like you're not there. You don't have like a little mini you on my shoulder whispering the things that I'm supposed to know, right? So there is no conversation here. You only have one opportunity to explain to the examiner your full ideas. So I always tell my students, you give your reasoning, you justify it with an example, and well, you can justify it with so give your statement, give it with a reasoning. So for example, in a because or due to or whatever, and then follow up or justify it with a follow-up example, even if you have to make it up. Okay. So the question is, have you justified your reasoning with examples? Cool. Final question for the section. Does the writing match the tone? For example, an essay, is it balanced or argumentative? Okay, that means that you have to understand the type of writings that you are doing. So Cambridge functions in one way, language cert functions in another way. Guys, there's some aptus in another. There's so many different exams. Your job is to talk to your teacher, whoever your teacher is, or whoever access that you have, and say, okay, let's use Cambridge as an example. Aurelia, how can I approach the essay? Okay, well, an essay, you can do it like an opinionated essay where you give the example and directly give the opinion, an example, and it could be like positive, 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 positive. That's personally not my favorite because I don't care about your opinion. Your job is to convince me that your opinion is the correct opinion. So I personally prefer a balanced writing, an argumentative writing, which means that you show advantages and disadvantages of topic 1, advantages and disadvantages of topic 2, and in the end, we can agree together at the same time that option 1 is the best or something like this, right? But that's an idea of what is best for you going forward, right? There's no right or wrong way if you understand the structure. Going into something like language cert, They focus on just a general formal or a general informal. Now, what does that mean? There's less structure. So you have to understand, okay, at least I need to understand how to formulate a formal writing. What does that look like? And then you need to understand. So what I'm saying is, in order to communicate your point correctly, you need to understand exactly what is being asked in the type of writing, which then comes into the organization. Okay, guys. Number one sentence is not one paragraph, right? And I see this a lot. Students just go comma, 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 full stop. And I have like 5 lines of writing and it's one sentence. Stop doing that. That's not okay, right? You need to be using linking words and cohesive devices like your however, your whereas, meanwhile, although. If you're a higher level, words like thus or hence, right? So you need to be clarifying your paragraphs, all right? And play with punctuation, a semicolon, punto y coma. Very popular in English writing. We love to play with punctuation. I know in Spanish it's not normal. Me da igual. Your job is to not write like you write in Spanish. Your job is to write how we write in English. And you could be like, really, that's bullshit. Again, me da igual, you guys need to do the writing. I'm just telling you what is necessary. So you need to play. Even if you don't use it correctly, you need to be making mistakes at the level that you're at. So at B2, you can make B2 mistakes. At C1, you can make C1 mistakes. And in that space, you can play and experiment with punctuation, like a hyphen or a dash. These are like guion. But specifically, my favorite, because it's the easiest, is a semicolon. Now, a semicolon works the same as the way that you are using a comma. You are connecting ideas. Idea 1, sentence 1, is the same idea as sentence 2, right? So instead of putting a comma or a full stop, you just put the semicolon, okay? So that I recommend highly because not a lot of students do it. And it shows them that you are at an English level. Do you know what I mean? Okay, what else have I written here? Okay, let's go through the questions. Have you organized your paragraphs correctly? Please also know how many paragraphs you need. Like you need to take time before you start your writing to clarify and analyze the types of, I want an introduction. Fine. I have 2 content points, so I need 2 extra body paragraphs, and I want a conclusion. Okay, so 4 paragraphs. Cool. If it's a B2 essay, you need 5 paragraphs because you have 3 things that you need to write in the B2 Cambridge. It just depends on the topic, right? As long as it's clear, you should have 1 content point connecting to 1 paragraph. That's the general rule, okay? Right, so organize paragraphs correctly. Are you using the correct writing structure? Guys, you need to go into the exam knowing, okay, an article needs to have a title and the register is more neutral to informal. Okay, I need to do a report or a proposal. They have a title and they have subheadings, as in subtitles, right? I need to do an informal letter, right? I can say, hey, Pepe. But I can't be like, yo, what's up, Pepe? There's things that you need to realize. So you need to study this. You need to ask your teacher. You need to look on the internet and figure these things out before you get into the exam, right? Okay, so correct writing structure. Using linking words and cohesive devices, and does the writing have flow? So a lot of students have jagged writing. So jagged meaning da, 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 da. And in reality, the writing needs to be like, na, 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 na. I don't know a better way to explain that, especially if you're listening via the podcast. But writings need to have flow. It needs to be easy to read. If it's difficult for me to read, I'm going to baja la nota immediately. It's not my job to make you pass. It's your job to want to make you pass. Does that make sense? So your cohesive devices and linking words. So I'll explain that later, but you just remember that you need to give your writing some flow. Okay. Okay, then I said, have you used a semicolon or other interesting punctuation? 1 sentence is not 1 paragraph. Cool. What are the requirements of the writing? For example, a B2 essay is different to a C1 essay. Again, I mentioned that before, that they function slightly differently. And an essay for Cambridge, which is a discursive essay, more like an academic essay, is different to an essay for language cert, which is more of a narrative essay, which is more like a personal story in the form of like beautiful writing, right? So please understand before you go in what is expected of you. Okay, looking at language. My question here for language, it says, are you using the correct grammar and vocabulary for the register of the writing? Is it formal or informal? Guys, in formal writing, there are no beautiful idioms and expressions and phrasal verbs, right? And academic writing is like cold, right? It's I don't want to hear your voice. I don't want to see your personality in the writing, right? Basically. Whereas an informal writing, that's your space to like pavorial and impress the examiner and demonstrate all your beautiful vocabulary. So you need to understand the type of writing and the type of vocabulary and grammar. Well, grammar, you can use any grammar. But for example, in a formal writing, you do a lot more passive. If it's an informal, you don't really need as much passive. You can put passive in to demonstrate to the examiner that you know how to use it, but it's not as necessary compared to a formal writing. Okay. And then it says, are you demonstrating the appropriate grammar and vocabulary for the level? I'm going to explain that in the next few steps. So writing rubric. If you don't know what is expected of you in the exam that you are doing, just Google it. B2 Cambridge writing rubric, right? C1 language cert writing rubric, and you will find it on the internet. Okay. Right. Oh, and I mentioned this as well. You can make errors at your level, but not at a level lower. If I see students, for example, at a B2, at a C1 level, doing things like I'm teacher in their writing, I'm agree, Betty, like get out of my classroom. You shouldn't be making these silly mistakes. Mistakes are good, mistakes are fine, but at the appropriate level. Okay. Now let's look at writing structures, how to set up the writing. Again, like I said before, you need to be planning. You need to spend 5 minutes figuring out what you need to write. A lot of students say to me, but Aurelia, I don't know what I'm going to write before I start writing. I just write. Well, and because of this, you're probably not going to get a very high mark. You're not going to get full content points. You might not get full organization. You're not going to get the marks that you're wanting because you are just inventing in the moment, right? I know, for example, in Cambridge, you have a very short or small amount of time to do a writing. It is an investment to plan how each, or what is the point, right? Or what is the highlight of each paragraph, right? So that gives you a lot of space to it gives you space to stay focused, right? It's an investment, una inversión, right? Even if it's 5 minutes, take it. Even if you need 10 minutes, take it. Because a lot of students lose points in content because they start talking, bueno, and my abuela, she also likes going to the beach. Me da igual, like I don't care. You cannot stray. Stray means to go like to the side. You can't go off topic. You have to stay on topic and having a small plan. Even if you go introduction, I'm choosing these 2 points. First body paragraph, right? So I'm going to talk about these advantages and these disadvantages. This one, second body paragraph, I'm going to talk about this point with these points and that points. And then, yeah. So you don't have to make it complicated. You just need a little space where you can sort of like give yourself a skeleton of what your writing is, okay? So it says, understand the type of writing that you are creating. I've already said that. For example, like I said before, a B2 Cambridge essay needs 5 paragraphs, whereas a C1 Cambridge essay only really needs 4. Is there a magical number that is the official correct amount of paragraphs? No. As long as you have paragraphs, number one, paragraphs are important. So make sure you're making paragraphs and that one idea connects to one paragraph. Everything else is it needs to, like I said before, if I have to read the paragraph like 2 or 3 times to try and understand what you are trying to say, bahalanota. So your paragraphs give you structure and be like, right, Aurelia, this paragraph, I'm talking about this point. And then the next paragraph, I'm going to be talking about that point. It clarifies what you want me to understand. Okay. And you need to make sure that each writing feels different. So let's say from a Cambridge perspective, you choose 2 formal writings. You choose the essay and, for example, the report. They're both formal writings, but the structure functions slightly different. An essay, Cambridge essay, feels more academic, whereas we can say that maybe a report feels more professional. It's not as formal. You can keep it more neutral, for example. But the flavor, el sabor, the flavor of the writings can be different. In language search, you have usually, not always, but sometimes you have like a formal letter and an informal letter. Again, the flavor, even though they are both writings, are both letters, they need to feel different. And you need to show that and demonstrate that in your writings. Let's look at my final point here. I say use your introduction to tell the examiner what they are going to read without saying, I'm going to talk about, oh my God. Students love, especially before experience in my class, like new students, they love to waste words going, I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the public transport system in Spain. Guys, this is not a presentation for school, right? This is not how, you're wasting, and I'm also not an idiot, right? So you need to use and sort of aprovechar. You need to make the most of your introduction to engage with me. If engage meaning I can't remember what it's called, engañar, gancho, a fish hook. When you are fishing, I'm the fish. You are the fisherman. You need to catch my attention with your introduction. So, for example, we live in an age where relying on AI and social media is part of our daily routine. However, can we find ways in order to improve our critical thinking skills? I don't know. I'm just inventing. But having, like, for example, a rhetorical question or something that I can connect to as a human being. We live in a society, or in this day and age, it is quite common to blah, blah, blah. Find ways to engage with the reader, right? And not just, oh, I'm going to present option A and option B. Okay? Okay. All right. Looking at register and tone, it says how the writing must sound. Is the writing formal? Is it neutral? I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. And this is just one teacher's opinion. Guys, like I said, I'm not God. You take my opinion with a pinch of salt, meaning you take my opinion, but you don't have to listen to my opinion. But remember, I've been teaching for like over 10 years. I know what I'm talking about. And none of my students fail because they listen to what I say. And I'm a little bit of like a dictadora in my class. But my students pass. So, evidence speaks for itself. But like I said, you have to put in your opinion in the writing, right? For example, in the Cambridge essay, you have to put in your opinion. It usually asks for it. But if you just go, I think, it's very like egotistical. It's very narcissistic. Why do I need to read about what your opinion is, right? Especially when it's an academic writing. Your job is to convince me that we will have the same opinion, all right? So, like I said, I keep personally all opinions for the end. Or if you prefer to have an opinionated essay, first give me the facts. For example, advantages and disadvantages. Therefore, I believe that blah, 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 blah. Advantages and disadvantages of the next point. And so we can agree that blah, 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 right? So be strategic about your writing in this way. What else have I written? Oh, I've said you need to keep your opinion at the end, or you need to convince me that your opinion is the correct one. Okay, fine. Avoid contractions. Remember that your contractions is when you shorten, like I am changes to I'm. I can't do that in a formal writing. However, you can do it in the informal writing. So just keep that in mind. And a lot of students ask me, Aurelia, if I have contractions, does it still count as two words? Because remember that you need to be making sure that you are putting in the correct amount of words. Your writing can't be too short and it cannot be too long, right? I always tell my students to try and aim for the middle. So for example, I can't remember now. Let's say that C1 is between 240 to 290. I can't remember. Let's say 240 to 290. I tell my students aim for 270, right? Because you need that extra amount of words for your reasonings, for your examples, for your justifications, right? But yes, a lot of students ask me, Aurelia, do contractions count as two words? Yes, they do. Okay. Then it says, do not use flowery vocabulary. So depending on the type of writing, if it's a formal writing, it cannot be flowery. You cannot purpurina your phrasal verbs and idioms and expressions, right? It needs to be more focused on like set expressions. It is common knowledge that we live in an age that another aspect to consider is, right, those are the types of structures, vocabulary sort of structures that the examiner is looking for. If the writing is more informal, right, I always tell my students to add a rhetorical question, because a rhetorical question is a fantastic way to engage with the reader, meaning I will be more interested to read your writing because I have a question that needs to be answered, right? It's human nature. Add in the flowery vocabulary, add in, I call it the sexy vocabulary, the beautiful vocabulary, idioms, expressions, things that you know will be impressive for your level. And then it says, know your audience, meaning you can't write the way that you would write to your friend on WhatsApp. Students think, oh, really, it's an informal writing. And then they start talking like how people talk on YouTube or like how influencers talk. No, you still need to know that the writing needs to be intended for a specific person. The director of a school, your peers, meaning your compañeros of a club, whatever. Make sure it's neutral or formal or neutral informal, Okay, let's look at linking words and cohesive devices. So cohesive devices are the structures that give a writing flow. Now, all linking words are a type of cohesive device, but not all cohesive devices are a type of linking word. A linking word connects two sentences together, right? So I've given you some examples because all of my students put but. Oh, and they love to put and another, they like to say good, and important, guys. Use synonyms, please. If I have to read important like 3 times in your writing, I'm going to get bored. Vital, essential, crucial, right? So play with your synonyms if necessary, right? Going into the linking words. So, for example, but you can change for however, nevertheless, although, and you can say moreover, in addition, furthermore. Because you can say since, due to, because of, or owing to. And when you want to focus on results, so these are very impressive and not a lot of students use it. So try and put this into your writing. Hence is por eso, therefore is por lo tanto, and thus is de este modo. So play with these. A lot of students, because they don't use it in their speaking, they don't feel comfortable putting it in their writing. But that is a good thing. If you started talking to me and saying, nevertheless, in your speaking exam, well, that's great. It's a fantastic word, but not a lot of people speak that way. So use it and practice it in your writing. You don't really need to use it in your speaking, okay? Right, let's turn the page. Final page. Okay, we're looking at cohesive devices. Now, like I said, cohesive devices give flow, and I said it earlier. These are the sentences. Like we live in an age when, in this day and age, another aspect to consider, right? So you could say, This means that despite the fact that, for instance, instead of just saying, for example, as a result, we live in a society where blah, 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 and another aspect to take into consideration. If you want more, and I recommend that you put more, just Google and just say B2 cohesive devices or C1 cohesive devices and see what comes up. Because, guys, there are so many interesting and quality websites out there to help you with your English. You just need to utilize it better. Okay. Now, nearly finished, guys, nearly finished. It says grammar, how to plug in grammar. Now, this is one of the things that really frustrates me the most, because you go to an English academy or you study English and you learn all this grammar, and then you're like, oh, well, I can ignore the grammar when I do the writing. No, your job is to analyze the grammar and go, how can I put this grammar into my writing? Okay. And a lot of students don't think that way. So here's a trick. Okay. Whether you're at an English academy or studying by yourself, do your writing, create your plan, figure out exactly what you want to do, and then take a highlighter, subrayador, and go, bueno, take 2 highlighters. Well, I always recommend 3. 1 highlighter for grammar, 1 highlighter for vocabulary, and 1 highlighter for cohesive devices and linking words. Okay, so grammar. Well, this is a B2 grammar structure, and this is a B2, and this is B2. Okay, now let's do vocabulary. Like, oh, that's a fantastic phrasal verb, or that's a really good synonym. Like crucial is what such a fantastic word for a B2 level, or crucial, vital. So do your vocabulary, and then in the final color, how many linking words and cohesive devices and semicolons are you using? When you can analyze your writing like that, you are doing a good job, because it is not obviously, it is my job to teach my students how to do the writings, and it's my responsibility to make sure they have all the information. But like I told my students, no soy diosa, no puedo purpurina los milagros en mis alumnos. You have to study, you have to analyze, you have to actually, do the work. Okay. And it's the only way that you will improve your writings. So if we had to look at a B2 level, think of things like passive voice. Phrasal verbs are very B2. You learn a lot of phrasal verbs in B2, so you can put them in your informal writing. Reported speech, making comparisons, and using the to and ing patterns. For example, when you have a preposition, siempre sigue con ing. When you have a verb like enjoy, siempre sigue con ing. So these are things that you learn in B2. Put them in your writing. C1 is a little bit more intense, negative inversions, cleft sentences, participle clauses, dependent prepositions. So not so much phrasal verbs, the dependent preposition is more important. Okay. And that's it, really, in a nutshell. To summarize, I have some extra notes though. So what I said, Aurelia's personal tips. So let me read them out to you. It says, try your best to avoid repeating the same vocabulary. For example, good, good, good. I've already mentioned that. The way that you write shouldn't sound like the way that you speak. Exactly. Make sure that it feels different, because speaking English is way more like como hablamos en la calle. Not the same. And use a highlighter system to help you analyze your writing. Yeah. Final thing that I would recommend is students go, Aurelia, but how do I know if I've passed? Okay. If we have to go back to the rubric. For example, Cambridge does 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 for content, 5 for communicative achievement, 5 for organization, and 5 for language. Language Cert does it 3. They go 3 for content, 3 for organization, 3 for grammar, 3 for vocabulary. So you need to know how much space you have to play, right? However, the key thing, you should definitely 100%, no bullshit, and I'm not even being funny, you should 100% get full marks for the content and full marks for organization, because you can control that. You can control your paragraphs, and you can control how you answer the question. You're not an idiot. You're doing a very difficult language exam, right? So at least 50%. And then with the grammar and the language, and if you have communicative achievement in Cambridge, you have more space to play. Maybe instead of 5 marks, maybe you get 3. Maybe you get 2. Maybe you get 2.5, right? But it doesn't matter because you've already passed at least 50%. You see what I mean? So that's it for today. We have some intensive courses happening now in April, going into June and July. So if you guys want to do some intensive courses specifically for language cert, please contact us. Also, if you want to improve your speaking, or whether it's for an exam or for work or just in general, you can go onto our website at theway.s and you just can plug in that you want to do 10 euros for 45 minutes of speaking, and we can chat. Sometimes the classes are with me, sometimes the classes are with Anthony or Caleb. We've got a lot of teachers on board for the way. So just contact us and we'll help you as much as we can. Okay, everyone, that's it for today. Bye.